I was in a meeting for a new creative project a couple weeks ago. We were discussing the storyboard for this new commercial that seemed pretty good, and there were a few strong minds in the room, all kind of mulling over not only how it would be made, but having complex conversations about how to represent a good worldview. Ideas were brought up, and naturally counter ideas were brought up as well. In one case in particular, though, my friend's opinion led to criticism about both his idea and the way that he thought about things. So that happened. Let's fast forward. That same day, in the evening, I was following an ongoing argument amongst one of my friends and some random folks on the internet. I think they were using Twitter. Both situations involved a friend whose thoughtfulness and candor I hold in pretty high regard. In both situations, this mature friend of mine will be in the midst of an argument with someone else, and in those moments when everyone's shoulders are tight and high, experience tells me this. There is no such thing as war between the humble and the humble. That's just not possible. If someone is humble, they will carefully listen, consider, ask follow-up questions for clarity, and meet their adversary halfway with a thorough yet compassionate rebuttal. And if they're really nice, they'll have receipts and citations. But what I just described is not a war. I just described an argument. Sometimes it feels like many people conflate the two. A war can only happen between the prideful and the prideful, or the humble and the prideful. It can never happen between the humble and the humble. If you know one person to be wise and the person arguing with them is being overtly defensive or in their face, that second person is probably not arguing for a better understanding or even a mutual one. So anyway, I'm in this meeting, and these are the thoughts that are going through my head. I'm in this meeting, and the inevitable heat-seeking rebuttal comes firing in, and it's in its course. And on its way, it doesn't detonate. It doesn't find its target. Why? Simple. My kind of admirable friend stepped away. And it's because she, he, or they did something simple on paper, but tough in practice. One of the greatest lessons I've learned by 30 is that there are few greater signs of maturity than allowing people to be wrong. It takes a cocktail of hardship, chronic embarrassment, and a self-realization of how unrealistically serious we take ourselves in order to learn how to step outside of a situation while it's happening. My friends who have seen much, they know how to clone themselves and levitate. I mean, here's what I mean. They'll have a conversation with you, and you'll see them in front of you making eye contact, but they also know how to float above you and look down at you and them having that conversation. They're calculating the expense, and in that, have a better chance at seeing how much they can help someone with their misunderstanding. They can measure their ultimate place in trying. The hopeful goal of an argument is, at least in theory, in my head, is that both parties leave with more information, whether they're right or wrong. The best thing I can give you is a worldview that you don't have, and vice versa. We're in communication because we need each other. We're on a team because we need each other. We're social animals because we need each other. And in that exchange, there really isn't much room for competition. Competition being the antithesis of why we're coming together in the first place. It seems like people who know how to check their egos at the door have already seen the fruits of practicing restraint in order to have a healthy argument with someone. They've experienced a healthy disagreement before. And when you see the true utility of an argument, time has shown me that two things happen to you. You've seen what productive discourse looks like. So the moment someone has flown off the rails or is coming to you with a personal attack or an unwarranted disqualification, you can discern that it might not be worth moving forward. If someone is coming for you on Twitter, the first question worth asking is if you can be the one to help them see. Sometimes people need healing, and over years I've learned that I might not be the person to do that. Sometimes there are deep-seated heart issues that will take a friendship and a series of conversations with someone trustworthy in order to undo. Sometimes I can be that person. Most of the time, I cannot. And if that person found it effective to charge their opinion with malice towards you, that might be a red flag for a heart issue. Or if their profile is very intense or hyperbolic, they might also not really be worth engaging. It works the same way in real life. Discerning whether to engage or not takes humility, because you need to be over constantly seeking vindication from enemies. You need to be over it. You need to be ready to take control of your life again, rather than saying, line them up and I'll take them out. Because, you won't. You actually won't. It also takes humility, because you're essentially taking sometimes violent criticism or commentary and responding with, how can I love this person in the best way? That requires a lot of death to self, and I'm not about to that's a lesson unto itself that requires way more than verbal communication. But it starts to become important over time, and unfortunately, that's not merely opinion. I would like for it to be so, but it's actually neurologically how we're wired. Heated arguments and drag culture, not drag queen culture, but dragging, it doesn't make us change. It actually prevents us from it. So inside each of us, we have what's called an infralimbic cortex. It's a section of the front of our brain within the prefrontal cortex that controls our habits and our capacity to both consider and instill change. We also have an amygdala, and that is triggered whenever we're threatened, challenged, or pulled into an argument. It's our defense mechanism. If you can imagine your brain as a computer, we do not have the power or the cooling system strong enough for both parts of the brain to operate at the same time. Meaning it is biologically impossible for us to both be in a heated argument and take in new information at the same time. We cannot reform or become better people while we are yelling. It's the reason why, and it's just true to life, there are so many TV shows where a couple will argue, then spend a day, they sleep apart during the night or whatever, and then they come back together and they're like, I'm so sorry for what I did, baby. I totally understand what you mean, or I was irrational and I didn't realize, and da-da-da-da, and the whole thing. There was no room for them to yell their side of the story at a person and also ingest why they might have been a terrible human being. So I guess in my time here, I've learned that instead of wasting time for the rush of validation and having an altercation twice, one time yelling out of a selfish need for vindication and another time actually reconciling, instead of glorifying the pride of feeling like the centered narrative in a grand Cinderella story, instead of being an obtuse hero with the privilege of sticking it to the man, sometimes it's best to express yourself once, listen, and begin an interesting discussion, or figure out that at this point in life, an argument with a toxic person isn't going to be worth it. That it's not going to be as worth it as it could be later on, or after some hardship has taken place.